One of the crowd's favorites, and so we're going to go ahead with Lunchroom Matters.
Coronet, not just for wiping your ass with anymore.
With a generous grant from the Tater Tot Foundation.
Educational collaborator Laura Ross, Lylan Drip.
Let us go home.
Just before lunch one day, a puppet show was put on at school. It was called Mr. Bungle Goes to Lunch.
By August Wilson.
It was fun to watch.
Then again, we eat paste.
In the puppet show, Mr. Bungle came to the boys' room on his way to lunch. He looked at his hands.
He wept.
His hands were dirty. And his hair was messy.
And his breath reeked of
But
sternum.
Mr. Bungle didn't stop to wash his hands or comb his hair. He went right to lunch.
Still, he was the cleanest person in the Taco Bell.
Then, instead of getting into line at the lunchroom, Mr. Bungle pushed everyone aside and went right to the front.
As the biggest, it was his right.
Even though this made the children laugh, no one thought that was a fair thing to do.
Bullshit! We love unfairness!
Then, in the lunchroom, Mr. Bungle was so clumsy and impolite that he knocked over everything, and no one wanted to sit next to him.
So they ate off the floor.
When he finally knocked his own tray off the table, that was the end of the puppet show.
Except for 3 encores.
The children knew that even though Mr. Bungle was funny to watch, he wouldn't be much fun to eat with. Phil knew that Mr. Bungle wouldn't have many friends. He wouldn't want to be like Mr. Bungle.
Mrs. Bungle, I mean.
Later, Miss Brown said it was time for the children who ate in the cafeteria to go to lunch. She hoped there weren't any Mr. Bungles in this room.
Children found this strange because Mrs. Brown so desperately needed any man she could get. Including a book.
Bill stopped to return a book to Miss Brown while his friends went on to the lunchroom. He would have to catch up with them later.
Phil liked all the books in the Elders of Zion series.
On his way to catch up with his friends, Bill almost walked past the boys' room, but he stopped and thought. Were his hands clean? No, they were a little dirty. Phil remembered that Mr. Bungle didn't wash his hands.
Well, it worked out fine for Bungle.
Mr. Bungle's hair was messy, too. Phil didn't want to be like Mr. Bungle.
He decided to shave off his hand and cut his hand off.
Inside the boys' room, Phil was surprised to see some of his friends washing their hands, too. Phil washed his hands well, with lots of soap.
And he decided to take some more soap home for his entire family of 10.
Jesus, kid.
Then he rinsed the soap off.
Even though Mr. Bungle didn't specifically address that, Phil felt it might be implied.
Phil dried his hands well, too. When he was finished, he threw the paper towel in the basket where it belonged. And then he made sure that his hair looked neat.
He was embarrassed how long and unkempt it had got.
Now, Phil and his friends were ready for lunch.
Just in time for class to begin again.
Boys will repress all their instincts to be boys.
There was a line of children waiting to get into the lunchroom when Phil got there. He saw some boys he knew at the front of the line.
So he did his Miss America impression.
Go up to the front with them. But Phil didn't want to break into line as Mr. Bungle did.
Bungle, Mr. Bungle.
So Phil went in. That was the fair thing to do. He would see his other friends inside the lunchroom.
From his seat at the nerd table.
The line moved very fast. So Phil was inside. First he picked up his tray.
You know who else picked up his tray?
Hitler!
No, Mr. Bungle.
They're the same thing, really.
Then he got his silverware.
Just before Harpo Marx stole it all.
He put his knife, fork, and spoon neatly on the tray. And then he slid his tray along.
Phil tried to whistle a tune to keep his mind off Mr. Bungle.
Bungle, Bungle, Mr. Bungle, Mr. Bungle, Bungle. Food in the cafeteria. It tasted good, and was good for him, too.
My favorite vegetable is ketchup.
Having a sandwich today, Phil decided to take the hot lunch.
He enjoyed flaunting it to the kids who couldn't afford it.
Phil took some bread and butter, too. And he knew what else he wanted. Milk.
That milk.
But Alice took the last carton on the tray. Maybe there was more milk. So he said,
Yo!
"May I please have some milk?" Phil remembered to say, "May I?" and "please." That was very polite. Yes, there was more milk.
You'll have to eat around the lumps, kid. This was out in the sun.
Phil remembered to say, Phil had good manners. He didn't want to be like Mr. Bungle in the lunchroom.
Mr. Bungle.
The cake looked delicious.
So we took 3 pounds of it.
At the end of the line, the lunchroom supervisor said she had noticed how polite Phil was, and she smiled at him. She wouldn't smile at a Mr. Bungle.
Or an Oriental. I
Phil
don't
went
like
to the table with his friend. Put his tray down carefully, pulled out his chair quietly, and sat down. He knew his friends wouldn't like a noisy Mr. Bungle at their table. There was someone Phil liked. Freddie.
Freddie Bungle.
Brought his lunch from home. It looked good. Freddie had a sandwich, an apple, a cookie, and milk.
He'd always give you his cookie because he wanted you to like him.
That was before Phil began to eat. He always put a napkin on his lap. So did Freddie.
Copycat.
Everyone liked Freddie. He was very polite. For example, if he had food in his mouth when someone talked to him, he always took time to chew the food with his mouth closed and swallow before he answered.
With a string of obscenities.
Phil noticed how straight and tall Freddie usually sat. Freddie kept his feet on the floor, too.
Hello, Freddie.
Phil would rather be like Freddie than like Mr. Bungle. Another polite person everyone liked was Alice.
Played by Hayden Panettiere.
This protected her friends at the table from any germ.
Which she had in spades.
Oh, God.
A boy ran past their table. You shouldn't run in the lunchroom. Only Mr. Bungle would do that.
That boy would hang himself in the bathroom later that day.
Phil and his friends wouldn't like to have Mr. Bungle at their table. Then lunchtime wouldn't be as much fun as it is.
We are having fun.
Phil enjoyed his lunch. Finally, he had eaten everything except his dessert.
He ate Freddie? Oh, my God.
He saved his cake for last. Only a Mr. Bungle would eat his dessert before he finished the rest of his lunch. And Phil wasn't a Mr. Bungle. The cake was good.
The cake was alive.
Some children are messy when they drink milk, but not Phil.
Phil just sucked.
Phil's friends finished. They didn't leave the table, but waited for all the others to finish eating too.
Hovering like vultures.
Phil was the last one done. He wiped his mouth and hands carefully with his napkin. Then he cleaned the table where he sat. He didn't want to leave his place at the table dirty.
It hurt the war effort.
Everyone at the table cleaned his own place well. But look at that table. It was left very messy.
Practically a biohazard.
Phil thought Mr. Bungle must have sat there.
Or one of those crappy cold lunch children.
But Phil didn't want to be like Mr. Bungle. So he put his chair neatly into place.
Catastrophe averted.
And his table was fine. Not a piece of paper or scrap of food was left on it.
Freddie had licked it clean.
No, Mr. Bungle sat here.
Oh, he was in Spearmint Rhino.
Phil's friends would probably put their waste papers and empty milk cartons where they belonged. In this way, they helped keep the lunchroom clean.
And developed unlikable personality traits.
Mr. Bungle wouldn't put his paper in the waste basket and his empty carton on the milk tray. Mr. Bungle probably wouldn't bother to put his lunch tray in the right place either, but Phil and his friends did.
His friends Rod and Todd Flanders.
And then Miss Brown told Phil and his friends how proud she was. They had left their table the neatest in the lunchroom. No one here was a Mr. Bungle, and no one wanted to be.
No one who mattered anyway.
Are you like Mr. Bungle?
Mr. Who?
Mr. Bungle is ashamed because he spoils lunchtime.
He's quite pleasant at dinner.
Oh, great guy.
Have good lunchtime manners, and lunch will be more fun for everyone.
Phil became a highly successful accountant, spilled crumbs on the floor, and then hanged himself.
Freddie broke his leg and Dennis the Menace's stunt double.
Mr. Bungle fell on hard times and is now shacking up with Lady Elaine Fairchild.